Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell. I'm calling to order a special open meeting of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. It's Thursday, March 13th, 10 a.m. We're at the Bochum Building in Santa Fe and also broadcasting this meeting online. The purpose of today is a continuation of our regional market participation workshops. So we have an agenda that was posted on Monday, and I guess I'll start with call the roll because I'm reading the agenda.
Commissioner Nyberg, Commissioner O'Connell,
Still here.
Commissioner Aguilera, present. Everybody, all the commissioners are here, Mr. Chair, and you have a quorum if you need it.
Great, thank you. And then we've got the agenda was posted either late last week or Monday. Commissioners, did you have any adjustments to make to this agenda? Seeing none, we will move on. So I'll accept the public comment, and then I'm gonna pass this meeting over to Commissioner Aguilera, who's been leading this regional market participation. So we'll start with public comment. Is there anybody with us here in the room that wanted to provide public comment? Seeing none, Mr. Rodriguez, is there anybody who's registered online?
Mr. Chair, we don't have anyone online for public comment.
Okay, great. Well, Commissioner, the meeting is yours.
Well, thanks again for convening on this regional markets workshop series. I've lost track of how many meetings we've had. I think maybe it was like 4, but it's been helpful in terms of providing transparency so far into the process. We talked about various studies, the WMEG study, the Brattle studies. We've had Pathways present and many other presenters, and that all kind of ended up in the commission adopting a guidance document that we issued, might have been in October, late October of last quarter. PNM, has expressed interest in joining the EDAM, the extended day ahead market, and EP has expressed interest in joining the Markets Plus. And so, this is a continuation of that conversation, and really looking forward to hearing, what the studies are that EP is counting on and kind of going to present today. I do want to note that during the last workshop, El Paso had explained that they had more studies to conduct before deciding on which regional market to join. And it was clear during the prior workshops and also during our meeting adopting the guidance document that El Paso would come and present the studies before expressing interest in joining any day ahead market. They had also noted that they plan to make a decision in the third quarter of this year. And so, I think the purpose of approving the governance document really was about transparency into the decisions. And the last thing I wanted was a surprise filing or announcement by a utility that they're joining X market. EP's announcement surprised me, and it surprised a lot of people. It was not transparent. And, I really hope to bring transparency back into this by having this workshop. So I'm not going to harp on that issue, but I felt that it needed to be said. So today we're going to talk about the factors that is driving El Paso's decision, and we'll have the opportunity for questions. So stakeholders, who have questions, will certainly have an opportunity for you to do that. I think with that, we can go ahead and get started, and hopefully we have Kathleen Stacks or somebody from the Pathways Initiative who's going to provide our first presentation. Patrick, are we ready there?
Yeah, I'll put the presentation on the screen.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that?
Yeah, I will load Pathways presentation up.
I appreciate that, I mean, you said what I think needed to be said is, for me, we have been using as a tool these workshops so we can hopefully have open dialogue before we get into the litigated phase of things where open dialogue's not as possible. So the value of that relies on people doing what they say they're going to do. So hopefully today's opportunity to reset on at least this topic with that. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay. Patrick, now we are ready. Thank you. Hi, Kathleen. Can you hear me? Patrick, can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner, I can hear you. Kathleen, can you hear us? Commissioner, looks like Kathleen's having audio problems.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I don't know what I did to change it, but it seems to be working now.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Kathleen, for joining us. Yeah, I think you have a presentation, and I'm not sure if you or Patrick will share that, but right now we're seeing ourselves on there. So if you can share it, that will be great.
And I see my presentation on there.
Commissioner, do you not see the opening slide?
No, we do not.
Okay, let me work this out here. How about now?
No, we still see just the speaker view.
And I'm happy to share my screen if I've got the slides too, if that's easier.
Okay, let me give you access to that. Kathleen. Hold
Okay.
on.
Okay, can you guys see this?
No, we cannot. We're still seeing the speaker view.
It's showing up on mine.
Yeah, it might be something on our end then. I think we can maybe, should we get started?
Slides are in the document.
Okay, the slides are in the docket, so I think maybe we should just get started.
Sure, yeah, and I'm happy to. Let me make it so that I can see what I'm talking about and see you guys at the same time. Okay. Well, thank you all for inviting me this morning. It's great to be back and talking with you all. And I'm excited to just provide an update on the Pathways Initiative and sort of where we are in that process. And I'll just do a quick kind of reminder and level setting of where we've been and where we are today, and sort of an update on where we're going. And then happy to take any questions along the way, or even or just at the end. So just as a reminder, the Westwide Governance Pathways Initiative kicked off in July of 2023 with a letter from regulators from 5 states, including New Mexico, asking the stakeholders in the West to come together and put forth a proposal that would enable markets that have the largest footprint in the West with an independent governance structure, preserving the CAISO market structures and minimizing duplication and costs, and something that could evolve and up to and including full regional transmission organization services in the future for voluntary participation from utilities. And so the launch committee, which was 26 members from 12 different sectors, came together in fall of 2023 and worked on a proposal to achieve the goals set out in that regulator letter. I think it is worth noting that one of the most critical foundational principles that the launch committee was working from throughout the discussion of the proposals was how do we protect the public interest? And we sort of defined the public interest in 2 main areas. One, maintaining state autonomy and authority and ability to set and enforce environmental policies. And 2, protecting consumers. And so really every aspect of this proposal that we developed had those foundations in mind in all of the aspects that we put together. So we ultimately recommended a 3-step process. The first step was to elevate the Western Energy Market governing body that oversees the Western Energy Imbalance Market from the CAISO and the extended day ahead market that the CAISO offers, to elevate that governing body to have primary authority over those markets. And so currently the governing body has joint authority with the CAISO board, which means that they sort of have equal footing, but the CAISO ultimately holds the cards to make any changes. This step gives the governing body primary authority and made it so that if there's a change to the tariff for EIM or EDAM, if there's a dispute between the governing body and the CAISO board, then both of them would be able to file their positions with FERC, and FERC would choose which one of them was most just and reasonable. And so we call it a jump ball provision because they're both of those positions were being presented on equal footing. And so this was an important recommendation for some other utilities in the West to see that we could actually increase the independence over those markets and take these steps, although it's not full independence because it's still within the CAISO construct. We set it up so that it required there's a trigger for this change to go into effect, and that is that we have to have utilities that meet at least 70% of the CAISO load outside of California, that have signed implementation agreements. And we also had a geographic diversity requirement in there. We needed at least one utility from the Pacific Northwest and one from the Desert Southwest. And so we've hit our Pacific Northwest geographic requirement because Portland General Electric has signed an implementation agreement, and still need someone from the Desert Southwest to sign on to that as well. We have not yet met that 70% threshold either. But we are optimistic that given the utilities that have indicated interest in participating in EDAM, that we'll be able to meet those thresholds, hopefully sometime this year. The CAISO board approved this proposal and has submitted a tariff change to FERC, which is still pending. So that was step one. Step two is really the sort of the meat of what the Pathways Initiative has been working on. And this is a proposal to create a new independent organization that would have sole authority over the market services. It would have a contract with the CAISO to operate those markets. It would have its own dedicated staff. It would run its own stakeholder processes, but again, sort of building on the existing infrastructure that the CAISO has already built and that market participants have invested in, being able to use those market constructs that that the West has really benefited from for the last 10 plus years at this point with the EIM, was a really critical part of this proposal. And then we also had a lot of public interest protections built into this as well. And this includes having public interest protections built into the, yes, I see. I will pause and try to share. Hold on. Does that work?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint app right now. So maybe just there we go.
Awesome. Okay. We're gonna overcome our technology this morning. It's gonna be a good day.
Yeah, it looks like you need to back up 2 slides too.
Okay. Well, I think I've kind of talked through, so this is a slide about step one. And I kind of talked through this piece. And then this slide is really talking about step two and the various components of the proposal. Does that work?
You know,
Excellent. So some of the other the other public interest protections that we built into this proposal were that this is a 501c3, public benefit corporation, nonprofit, that will have an independent consumer advocate organization to enable and facilitate engagement from state consumer advocate organizations, and make sure that they have a very specific role to play in this, ensuring that those consumer advocates also get access to data from the market monitor, ensuring that there's an ongoing role for the body of state regulators that currently works with the governing body, and that would shift over to this new regional organization. Having a stakeholder process that has a really robust set of sectors and a lot more stakeholder-driven operations and functions, and then really that this is an organization that is able to expand and add additional market services as Western entities want them. So we've set it up so from the get-go, it's a relatively small organization, but with the ability to grow as, again, Western stakeholders are interested in and demanding those additional services. So where we are today, so we put out that proposal in November of last year, and it was the result of monthly stakeholder meetings, additional workshops, lots of public comment, and really a lot of negotiation and iteration among the launch committee members to find something that was that could work for the West, that was a significant but small enough step that we could build the trust and really demonstrate these benefits without asking people to give up too much from the get-go. And so we started this year in our implementation phase. And the launch committee created a sort of a subcommittee of its group that we're calling the Formation Committee. And that's made up of 7 members of the launch committee. We also have 6 liaisons from the BOSSR, from the WEM governing body, and a member of the CAISO board, who are not voting members. They are not official members, but they've been attending and participating in our meetings to make sure that we're able to incorporate their perspectives, their experience. They can raise flags as we're developing some of the documents and the next steps, because we're taking this 170-page proposal in writing and trying to make it a reality. And of course, there are things that once you get into reality that look a little different. So we've set up our work in 3 different stages, and we're in this sort of first stage while there's legislation moving through the California process. Ultimately, we need California to pass a bill to enable the California utilities to participate in this market and enable the CAISO to move that governance over the EIM and EDAM to this new independent entity. So I'll talk about the bill in a second, but we do have a bill that's been introduced in the California legislature to enable those changes. We don't want to get ahead of the legislature, so we're doing some of these implementation documentation drafting activities at this point, working on the corporate documents, working on an initial budget, thinking about what the process is for seating a permanent board, continuing to refine our stakeholder process. All of those pieces are things that we're working on currently. Once a bill passes in California and is signed, which is October 12th is the deadline for bill signing in California, then we step into the next stage of work where we'll incorporate the new regional organization. We'll seat a board. We'll start to recruit staff and actually get the organization underway, develop the tariff changes, and go through the stakeholder process that we'll need to develop what the tariff change needs to be to actually shift that governance over. And then that third phase is once we actually have a board seated and the RO is an independent organization, it can then really drive the rest of the work. The formation committee and the launch committee will still be around to assist however the RO board would want us to, especially given these early stages before they have staff. So just making sure that we're continuing to keep this organization moving. And then once we have a tariff change and the change of this governance is in place, the launch committee can be released and we'll have a fully functional regional organization. So throughout that process, we're committed to continuing our stakeholder engagement that we've laid out from the get-go. So we have, again, monthly stakeholder meetings. We'll hold workshops on the various proposals and drafts of these implementation documents. We'll have opportunities for written comments. So we think that it continues to be really critical to have opportunities for the public to weigh in and provide comments and help us refine this document moving forward. So I'll talk a little bit about the bill in California. I'm actually in Sacramento right now. I testified at an informational hearing yesterday about the Pathways Initiative. But we have Senate Bill 540 introduced by Senators Josh Becker and Henry Stern on February 20th. It is co-sponsored by IBEW, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the National Natural Resources Defense Council. And then has a really big coalition, both of folks and organizations that participated on the launch committee and beyond, that is in support. We even have a letter with so far 35 logos of customers and developers and CCAs and environmental organizations, utilities that have signed on and in support of this bill. The sort of the timing of, actually, I think I have and I can go back to the last slide in a second, but just from a timing standpoint, California has a very long legislative process. It is a sort of technically year round, so convened in January and goes into September. The bill was introduced on February 20th. There's a requirement here that no action can be taken for at least 30 days. And so we won't see a first policy committee hearing until sort of later this month or early April. And then it will start to move through the process. It started in the Senate. And then, of course, once it goes to the Senate, it'll move over to the Assembly. The bill itself enables the California utilities to participate in markets that are governed by this new regional entity, so long as the regional entity meets a certain set of criteria. And those criteria reflect the public interest protections that we built into the proposal. And so what this means is that it is not California dictating what the new RO needs to be, but it is dictating whether or not California can participate, so long as it looks like what the launch committee proposed that it look like. Once this bill passes, we'll be able to continue with our process and get to a point where that governance shifts over to the new regional organization, and we'll have a fully independent board in place that is chosen by and selected by representatives on a nominating committee that are representatives of our 9 sectors. So really, truly independent group of people that are selecting the board, and an independent set of people that are sitting on that board moving forward. So we are, and then at that point, that organization can again work with Western stakeholders to continue to address whatever needs and concerns that the rest of the West has. And I think with that, that's kind of where we are right now. So we're in a, I think, really exciting time where we've got legislation moving. We've been able to really act and demonstrate the progress that we've been making and do what we said we were going to do. We still have a lot of support and engagement from stakeholders. We actually recently added a representative from PNM to the launch committee. We lost one of our other representatives, and we're able to add in Kelsey Martinez. So we were thrilled to see her join us on the launch committee. And so at that point, I'm happy to answer any questions about where we are, where we're going, any aspects of the proposal.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. We have some questions here, and we have a new commissioner who you haven't met, Commissioner Nybert. Well, maybe you haven't met, I don't know.
I have actually met. We did meet
Oh.
in Washington, D.C.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Get to hear him again.
Yeah.
Kathleen, I do have one question on slide 7. Are there 2 California bills, or is that a transposition in the bottom of the page? Is that Senate Bill 450 or should it be 540?
That is just one bill, 540. Sorry about that. That's a slight dyslexia on my end. Sorry.
Well, we're currently dealing with items in the New Mexico legislature, and it seems like California takes more time, which could be nice. It's pretty hectic.
Pros and cons.
I don't have any questions right now. Chairman, do you have any?
No, I just appreciate the update here. I mean, there was quite a bit had changed since the last workshop we did with that concept. So I thought it was worth it just as part of the workshop process to bring them in for an update. So thank you, Kathleen, for doing that.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, and I'll keep you posted as we move through the legislative process in California. And again, we'll continue to have these monthly stakeholder meetings where we'll provide progress on the work that the formation committee is doing. We have our next public meeting, I think, on March 28th, where we'll have a more detailed work plan and timeline of the tasks that the formation committee is undertaking over the course of the next couple of years. So really appreciate the opportunity and use me as a resource moving forward if any of you have any questions.
Well, Kathleen, before you hop off,
Yeah.
I wanted to check inside the room here to see if anybody had any questions, and then see if anybody has any questions online.
Sure.
Does anybody in the room have any questions? Yes, so we have one question, if you wouldn't mind just, using the microphone.
Hello, Kathleen. My name is Nancy Burns, and I work for a Paso Electric company. I do the state regulatory work here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's nice to meet you.
You too.
And good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. I do have a question. Did I understand correctly that step 1 and step 2 are concurrent?
Sort of. Step 1 is underway already. There's a tariff pending at FERC. So once that gets approved and we meet that trigger, that will go into place. So that is already underway.
Okay.
We are working on the implementation of step 2 as we go, which is, again, we're not going to be able to incorporate this organization until at the end of this year, really. And then it's probably going to take us, I don't know, a solid 18 months to get through all of the stakeholder process necessary to get to that point where we're ready to file the tariff change with FERC to enact step 2. So they're both moving, although step 1 will go into effect before we get to the full effect of step 2.
Got it, because the tariff's been filed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then was there a step 3 on your slide?
So step 3 is really the point at which the RO can continue to evolve and add those market services. So it's after the RO is fully created. It's that future, the future evolution.
Oh, okay. I got it. Thank you very much. This is nice to meet you. Thank you, guys.
Do we have any other questions inside the room? It looks like we don't. Do we have any questions online? And if we do, Patrick, if you could just manage those.
Commissioner, it doesn't look like we have any questions on Zoom.
Okay. So we're running ahead of schedule in that case. And I don't know if Brattle is ready to present. I think if they are, then maybe we could go ahead and do that.
Hi, Commissioner. Yeah, this is John from Brattle. I'm ready to go. If we want, we can start early as long as that's okay with you all.
Yes, this is being recorded, and people I think are watching already. So I think going ahead and starting now would be great. I appreciate you being ready. Thank you.
Okay. Patrick, I guess I can just go ahead and share my screen. Is that the best way to do this?
Yes, John, let me give you access to that.
Okay, can you see the slide?
No, we can't.
Try again.
I think it might be on our end. There we go. Now we can see it.
Okay, great. Well, let me just start by saying thanks for having me back. Sorry I can't be there in person. Just couldn't make it this time, but maybe next time. I on the schedule, I had about 45 minutes to present, so we're running a little bit ahead, but I still plan to take probably about 25 to 30 minutes to present, and then that will leave time for questions. But of course, if there are questions as we go, feel free to just jump in. And I'll pause throughout to leave space for that too. So I wanted to start maybe with a quick review of the work we've done over the last 9 months or so now for El Paso. As the commission is aware, right, this summer we did a joint study with El Paso and PNM. And we presented the results of that study to the commission at the end of August of last year. In that study, we conducted 3 different cases. We did, which we'll review here in a second, but we did a current trends case that kind of looks at how the markets are evolving in the WEC, but keeps PNM and El Paso in EIM for the moment. And then we did an EDAM case where both El Paso and PNM moved to EDAM. And then we did a Markets Plus case where both El Paso and PNM moved to Markets Plus. What we did not do at that time, though, is test a sensitivity where the 2 utilities in New Mexico went into different markets. And so that was something we did for El Paso. In the green box here, the kind of sensitivity analyses we did in the fall of last year, towards the end of last year, we did an analysis where we looked at a case where PNM goes into EDAM and El Paso goes into Markets Plus, and calculated the benefits for El Paso on how that moved things. The other thing that we looked at for them for El Paso was the value of the eddy tie. So our original study that we did last summer kind of treated the DC ties to the Eastern Interconnection almost agnostically, right? There were no flows on them. They were not optimized to the market or anything like that. In what we've done now, or what we did in the fall, to kind of supplement that analysis, is we looked at what the value of trading is over the DC tie. And I'll get into that in more depth, what analysis we did there. But we did kind of a high level look at the value of what trading could be on the eddy tie for El Paso. A couple of notes on this. The study we conducted, these kind of sensitivity analyses, used the exact same model that we used for the joint El Paso PNM study last summer. And that was intentional, right? We didn't want to update the model because we wanted to be able to have an apples to apples comparison across cases. So what we're able to do now is use the sensitivity analysis to directly compare to the current trends case and the EDAM case and the Markets Plus case. So you'll see when I present the benefits, we can compare across them and draw conclusions from that. So looking ahead to slide 2 now, this is a refresh of kind of what we did and a visualization of what we did in the summer, as well as the sensitivity analysis here on the far right of the screen. And just to kind of refresh these maps, I know we looked at these a lot last summer when I was there, but to kind of refresh them, the dark blue circles are the entities we assume join EDAM. The orange circles are the entities we assume join Markets Plus. The teal circles are entities we assume stay in EIM only in that case. And then the kind of yellow circles is the SPP West RTO expansion. So that's the expansion of the SPP RTO into the WEC. That's going live next year. And then the gray circles are entities that have, are in other markets or not in markets at all. And so you can see the 2 cases, as I described, that we did last summer, both PNM and El Paso here move in unison, either to EDAM in the one case or Markets Plus in the other. In our sensitivity, we have them split. And what we've done is calculated the value of trading over the eddy tie in all 4 cases. But of course, it changes across the cases. The main difference is that in Markets Plus, we assume that that tie is going to be optimized with SPP East. My understanding is that the plan is that those types of connections across the interconnection with the RTO in the East will be optimized in the market. So in the cases where El Paso is in Markets Plus, so the Markets Plus case and our sensitivity case, that tie is optimized, whereas in the current trends case and the EDAM case, we model it at historic flows, which my understanding are based on kind of contracts that El Paso has in place. So those are kind of the differences between what we did last summer and that we presented to the commission at the end of August versus the sensitivities we were doing now. Let me just pause there for a second. Any questions or on that?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Some related to kind of what you just explained, but before I go to that, just a more general question. When was the study completed and sent to El Paso?
I don't recall the exact date off the top of my head, but sometime in the fall of last year is when we finished this work.
Okay.
So towards the end of the year. I mean, maybe the El Paso folks who are presenting later, maybe they remember, or I can go back and check, but
I'll ask that. And then I just want to make sure I have a good understanding of how the eddy tie is being considered. So it seems like it says the value of trading over the eddy tie is calculated for all 4 cases. So it seems like the eddy tie is being considered in all 4 cases, but in this sensitivity analysis where El Paso joins Markets Plus, the eddy tie is being optimized. And so I'm wondering if you could explain what that means about optimizing the eddy tie. And
Yeah.
also, maybe if you could provide some background on that eddy tie, given that the sensitivity analysis here relies on that tie pretty heavily, I would say.
Yeah, well, so let me answer the first part of that. What we mean by optimized is that we don't, and I'll explain this in a few slides in more detail, but we allow the trading over the tie in both the sensitivity case and the Markets Plus case. In the 2 cases where El Paso's in Markets Plus, we allow the tie to flow freely based on, whenever El Paso is purchasing power, we assume that the tie is importing. Whenever they're selling power, we assume that they're exporting. So we kind of align the direction of trading on the tie with the internal prices in El Paso and the trading dynamics that El Paso is experiencing in each hour of the day throughout the year that we simulate. Whereas in the current trends case and the EDAM case, we hold it constant at 2023 historic values. So it's basically, actually, you'll see in the charts I have later, it's basically at constant value throughout the year, and we value what that trading flow is, and we find that it does have value, right? It does produce positive value for El Paso in the static kind of historic operation of the tie, but it does not produce as much value as an optimized tie would in a Markets Plus that is optimized with SPP East.
Okay, and then so then I guess the one thing I want to kind of highlight is whether this is really an apples to apples comparison. It seems like in the current trends and EDAM scenario, the eddy tie is not being optimized, but then it is being optimized for the sensitivity analysis. Is that
the Markets Plus analysis?
And the Markets Plus, yeah. So is that a fair question? Or and the reason I ask also is because we're talking about a different, in the sensitivity analysis, I think we're talking about two markets, Markets Plus and SPP. And so kind of a follow-up question would be whether this sensitivity analysis where the eddy tie is being optimized is also a valid optimization to consider with the EDAM scenario.
Yeah, it's a good question. So it is two markets, right? Markets Plus and the RTO in the Eastern interconnection are different markets. My understanding is that there is discussions, and maybe the El Paso folks have more information on this, but there are discussions in place to allow for the optimization of both of those markets across the seam. Whereas, so in the cases where El Paso is only in EIM or is in EDAM, that optimization wouldn't be possible because you have two different market operators, or at least, under current plans, it's not. It is possible to optimize across multiple markets, even with different operators, of course, but at least the current plan is not to do that. Whereas in Markets Plus, my understanding is that that's the plan, to actually optimize across the ties and also across the SPP West and Markets Plus footprint. That goes back to the original Markets Plus proposal document that came out several years ago, talks about optimizing across the RTO and Markets Plus. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yes. Yes, I think it does. And I think it's maybe making some assumptions and but I see where the reasoning is coming from. Still wondering whether, through like a seams agreement, you have the same type of opportunity in EDAM. But that's sufficient to answer my question. And then I did have just kind of a larger question about the eddy tie and its functionality and I don't know that you would have the answer. Probably El Paso has better answers, but the capacity and who has entitlements and who owns it and whether it needs any upgrades, and if it does, how much they're anticipated to cost, and whether any of that was considered in this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what I'll say is, to the first point, I think you're right. If you had an agreement between EDAM and SPP East, right, the SPP RTO in the East, then there is potential to optimize the tie even for entities that go into EDAM. But such an agreement, would have to be negotiated and put in place. So I think there are steps that need to be taken that haven't been taken to access that value. But like you said, maybe the potential is there to do that. To the other question about the capabilities of the eddy tie and whether upgrades are needed and things like that and who owns rights on it, I think El Paso is probably best positioned to answer that. But I can tell you what we used in the study. In the study, we assume it has a 200 megawatt capacity and that all of it is available for optimization. So even if El Paso doesn't have all the rights, we've kind of assumed that the other rights holders up to 200 megawatts of capacity will, are also either Markets Plus or SPP East participants and therefore are, involved in the optimization or allow their rights to be used for that. So that's what we've assumed in the study, right? We've assumed a 200 megawatt tie that with all of its capacity available for optimization.
Okay, thank you. And Chairman has a question as well.
Yeah, thanks. Just one more question on this, the tie modeling, since we're on the topic is, there's more ties between SPP and WEC than eddy tie. Were they all modeled the same?
Great, good question. No, we did not do that because this was just looking at the value to El Paso. We didn't look at at PNM's tie or Public Service Colorado's tie or the ties up in Wyoming and Montana. We have not optimized that. I'll get into that a little bit later. And to be clear, right, I'll talk about this when I get into how we did this calculation of the eddy tie value. We didn't do kind of an if we wanted to do this kind of to actually simulate the optimization of the tie, we would have had to have built SPP East and other parts of the Eastern interconnection into this model, which we didn't do because that's a really big undertaking. It would have taken many months and a lot of time and effort to do that. But so what we did, we calculated it based on the price signals we have from our WEC model. So it is, I'll get into this, but it is that's why we call it kind of a high level view of what the value of the tie would be. If we wanted to actually optimize it, we would have to kind of build in SPP into our model, which we didn't do. So for that reason, we could do the same calculation if we wanted to for all the other ties, but the model we've put together, and the calculation we're doing here, it wouldn't impact the value for El Paso at all.
Okay. And then just preview for a question to come, because it sounds like you'll get there later, is there's a lot of studies that show there's value sitting on the table for transfer between the West and SPP. If we're only treating one tie as wide open, what's the risk that we're just pushing all that value through one location and skewing the result?
Well, yeah. So for the same reason why, optimizing the Lamar tie, for example, in Colorado wouldn't impact the value of El Paso. In our calculation, the same thing can happen in the other direction, right? By not doing the others. If we were doing a model where we actually simulated SPP East and the WEC together, then I would agree with you. We would need to do all the ties, or otherwise the simulation would be lopsided and favor the one tie that we did optimize. But this is a static calculation, so it doesn't take into account, price impacts in SPP East that may then impact the value of trading. It's static just based on the prices in the El Paso balancing area. So yeah, that's a great question. And like I said, if we were going to do a full simulation model of both markets on either side of the tie, then we would definitely need to take into account all the import and export points between them.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, it's just exploring the difference between reality and models is kind of where my head's at. The old adage that models are useful, but they're wrong.
Yeah. Why don't we get to that when I talk more about kind of actually the process of what we did here for the tie and the limitations of that calculation versus the what we can see with it. Any other questions?
I do have one question. The sensitivity study on the existing eddy tie is based on the capacity of the current line and does not consider the new transmission that's going into southeast New Mexico, possibly to upgrade that entire area, does it?
That's a good question. I mean, like I said, we assume it has a 200 megawatt transfer capability across the tie. Whether upgrades are needed to achieve 200 megawatts, I think is probably a better question for El Paso to answer. That I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, but you didn't consider other potential resources that are coming into that area on the east side of the state that maybe could be utilized in the El Paso market if there was capacity on that line that exceeded its current capacity.
We do take into account new generation resources that are planned between now and 2032, right? We simulate 2032. So any new resources that are planned and known to be online between now and 2032, we have put in the model. And that's based on data that El Paso and PNM provided us last summer when we did the original study.
Okay, but I guess what I'm getting at, your sensitivity study didn't calculate optimizing transfers through maybe a bigger transmission line or something that might be useful in the future. It was based on the existing line and its capacity.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah. Like I said, if there are upgrades needed to achieve 200 megawatts, then that would be something El Paso could speak to. But like as far as other large transmission lines in the region, the only one we did put SunZia in, but I don't think that really impacts the capacity or transfer capability of the eddy tie. It's not interconnected in New Mexico, so it wouldn't, increase the transfer capability on the eddy tie. But we do have SunZia modeled in here. We don't have Southline. Just at this point, it felt too speculative to include it by 2032. So yeah, that I don't know if that's what you're asking specifically about, Commissioner.
No, I'm just aware that there's additional transmission that's coming into Southern Eddy and Lee counties, and that additional transmission will allow, potential transmission to go west through an eddy tie if it was capable of doing that, I suppose. So I was just wanting to make sure that your modeling was based on its existing capacity and was not considering either an upgrade to the system that would increase the capacity or a new line paralleling the existing line or replacing the existing line.
No,
Are you
yeah.
asking about transmission lines that are in SPP?
No, it's the eddy tie to Artesia that goes.
No, but I mean, the transmission lines you're talking about are like Crossroads and, yeah, okay.
Okay. Yeah, no, my understanding is it's based on the kind of existing transmission topology. But if again, like we assumed it was 200 megawatts, if there's upgrades needed to maintain that 200 megawatts in the future, then that's something El Paso could address. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so let's go forward. I think, yeah, let's go forward to talk a bit about. Oh, sorry, my PowerPoint here seems to be frozen for a second. Hold on. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I wanted to show this picture and kind of step through it a little bit so we could understand some of the changes that take place with the sensitivity. We looked at a picture very similar to this, or a couple pictures very similar to this when we looked at the original study. The difference here, of course, is that, we have PNM in blue at the top and El Paso in orange, which means that they're in different markets.
John, sorry to interject. Patrick or whoever's controlling the slides, can you move forward a couple of slides? Actually, 1, 2, 3 slides. Yeah, that's where we are. Thank you.
Oh, did something happen as I'm not showing the picture anymore? Or?
Now we see slide 5, and there's like a Sputnik type graph.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to illustrate here with this picture kind of what changes when we have El Paso and PNM in different markets. It does in that sense limit, the trading El Paso can do with other entities in the West when it's in a separate market than PNM inside the day-ahead market, right? Because it cannot trade with PNM in the day-ahead market and then go through 4 corners to other entities. But El Paso has a direct connection with Tucson. So it will trade with Tucson Electric in inside Markets Plus, and then also its rights to Palo Verde can we assume can be used in Markets Plus, just like we assume they could be used in EDAM, which will allow it to trade with other entities at Palo Verde that are in Markets Plus, specifically Arizona Public Service, SRP, and Tucson. And then those entities have rights to Four Corners where it can interconnect with Public Service Colorado and RTO West. So the trading paths we can see inside the Markets Plus footprint, are either directly with Tucson or through Palo Verde to Arizona and then up to Four Corners. Obviously, there is still trading that occurs between PNM and El Paso in our sensitivity case, but this is a bilateral trade now, right? So bilateral trading can occur between the two entities. Keep in mind that because it is a market-to-market seam, we do assume a slightly lower hurdle rate. So it is a slightly more efficient seam than what we would have in the current trends case, where the two entities are both in EIM only. The day-ahead trading, in the case where they're only in EIM, we assume a $6 hurdle on. But in the case where it's a market-to-market trade, we assume it's a $3 hurdle. So it is a little bit more efficient than our current trends case to trade bilaterally with PNM in this sensitivity case. And the reason we assume it's a slightly more efficient seam is because of the market designs, right? Particularly Markets Plus has intertie trading enabled automatically as part of membership. So it will allow bilateral trading to occur more efficiently, we believe. EDAM has that capability, but it's elective. So if PNM elects to use it, then you'd have intertie trading on both sides of that seam. So we do see that we still maintain a lot of trading between PNM and El Paso in this sensitivity, and we'll see those exact results in a little bit. But I just wanted to kind of point out how the topology of the physical topology doesn't change, but the market topology changes a bit, and what's capable within the markets changes a bit. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And
oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
just one clarification here. I think the orange and the blue here is based off of the market chosen. So like EP in Markets Plus and PNM in EDAM, right? Because for example, I guess what I'm saying is like this orange line that ties EP to Palo Verde could be blue if El Paso chose to join EDAM.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. The color coding I should have mentioned is the same as on the charts we were just looking at. So orange is Markets Plus, dark blue is EDAM. And yes, like in the case where that we did earlier, last year with El Paso in EDAM, that this exactly was blue. You're right. The Palo Verde connection was blue, and then also the connection with PNM is blue because you're in the same market with PNM. So if in the case where El Paso joins EDAM, this becomes a market connection with PNM, and the Palo Verde rights become a market connection. And then similarly, in the case where PNM joins Markets Plus, right? We did the scenario where both entities joined Markets Plus. These rights to Four Corners through PNM become part of Markets Plus, and PNM's Palo Verde connection becomes part of Markets Plus too. So this graphic, right, you can change the color coding. All the lines that are connected with any entity, would change and follow them into the market that they go in our different cases.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then I had this slide to talk a little bit about how we did the eddy tie calculation. So we talked a bit about this already, but let me just kind of say, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't do a complete optimization of SPP East along with the WEC for this because that would, like I said, would have just taken a long time and a lot of effort. What we did is instead calculate kind of an adjustment to our APC, which APC is our adjusted production cost benefit metric, which we'll talk about in the next slide. We adjusted that based on the value of flows across the tie. And as I stated, we treat them differently for the two cases, or for the two market participation scenarios. So in current trends and in the EDAM case, where El Paso is either in EIM only or in EDAM, the optimization with SPPP East is, at least under current agreements, not feasible. So it remains a bilateral trade. And instead of kind of predicting what bilateral transactions would look like, we used historical data. We'd use the 2023 historical flows, and just assume that the tie was flowing as it did 2 years ago. And that has value. So when there's a flow into El Paso, we value that as a purchase. And basically what we say is that offsets purchases that El Paso was making otherwise, from its neighbors or whatever, and we adjust our APC accordingly. When it was the tie is flowing in the other direction into SPP East, we assume that that's a sale, and we credit it to El Paso at its generator prices, so at the prices that are prevailing in the El Paso balancing area. And then the difference in the Markets Plus cases, so those are the two cases where El Paso's in Markets Plus, we, like I said, quote unquote, optimize it in that we allow the tie to flow freely in any hour when El Paso has excess generation and is selling into the Markets Plus market. We assume that it's going to flow the tie to SPP East in its full capacity. And then in hours when it's buying from Markets Plus market, we assume that the tie is flowing into El Paso at its full capacity. And again, we credit El Paso in those hours with either a purchase or a sale, depending on the direction, at the prevailing price in El Paso's area. And that's how we calculate the value in all four cases. The historic data for 2023 already has outages built into it. Because obviously the historic data will show no flows in hours when the tie was on outage. So we do the same thing in the Markets Plus case, and the sensitivity, we impose the same outages so as to capture some, let's say, unavailability of the tie in certain hours. I should say, as it says at the bottom of the slide here, this approach does rely, by the way, I'm on slide 6 now, if you're not seeing that. Our approach relies on several assumptions here, right? Because we're not doing a co-optimized Eastern interconnection and Western interconnection model here, the implicit assumption is that eddy tie flows do not impact prices in El Paso. So effectively, we're treating either imports or exports over the tie as price takers. The eddy tie does not shift between day ahead and real time, right? We only do this calculation based on day ahead prices, whereas in reality, there is going to be some imbalance between day ahead and real time, and there may be additional value to capture there that we don't calculate in our analysis. We're also assuming that the SPP market is kind of liquid enough to either supply all of the imports into WEC or to absorb all of the exports from WEC at the prices that are prevalent in the Markets Plus market. So we've kind of assumed that SPP is liquid, and that gets to the question earlier about the other ties and the impact of other ties. We're kind of assuming in this that the market on either side of the tie really is liquid enough such that the impacts don't move beyond El Paso. And again, if we were doing a full simulation, we could actually test that. But in this kind of high level analysis, we are limited by basically making an assumption on the liquidity of the markets. And then on the last thing I should say is we haven't calculated the impact on congestion revenue associated with tie flows, or if the tie flows would change congestion allocations or values for any of El Paso's neighbors. I think as we've kind of tried to lay out here on this slide, we're doing a fairly high level analysis of what the eddy tie value would be, which we think is a good approximation, but certainly is limited in the sense that it is a calculation that based on ex post of modeling results, as opposed to actually modeling both markets on either side of the tie, and all of the other DC ties between them, along with the eddy tie. So let me pause there if there's more questions on kind of our approach and limitations of that approach or things like that.
Commissioners, do you have, I'm not seeing any questions from the commissioners here. Yeah, I think I already kind of asked my questions about the eddy tie. So I think we could move on. Thank you, John.
Okay. Okay, so moving to slide 7. If you can't see my screen and you're following along, we're on slide 7 now. This is the summary table of benefits that we saw last time when we presented the old results, and the kind of new stuff is circled here in orange and red. So the part of this table that is not circled, the 3 columns labeled CT for current trends, EDAM, and Markets Plus, these are exactly the same results we saw in August. So nothing has changed in that part of the table. And just to kind of refresh on that quickly, we saw the adjusted production cost across the top line of the table, declined in both our EDAM case and in our Markets Plus case. This is just for El Paso Electric, by the way. This is not for PNM or New Mexico wide. This is just for El Paso. You can see that the adjusted production cost did decline more in Markets Plus, right? So there's a larger benefit in Markets Plus from a production cost perspective. But then we have other value drivers like the change in short-term wheeling revenues, which didn't really move much at all for El Paso. But then congestion revenues did change quite a bit. So you had a fairly large, about $16 million of congestion in EDAM and EIM in the EDAM case, and about $12.5 million of congestion in Markets Plus. So the congestion added in both markets, but slightly more in EDAM. But then if you recall, the big change in value driver was the bilateral trading revenue. And we talked a lot about this in August when I presented. That's mostly coming from trades with Tucson in the EDAM case, because in the EDAM case, Tucson is in Markets Plus, El Paso's in EDAM, so that's a bilateral connection between them. And we found that was a really high value connection because prices fall in New Mexico in the EDAM case with the import of California solar. It creates a really high value trade with Tucson. However, we also talked about the fact that bilateral trading revenue is kind of up for grabs for anyone in the market to capture, right? We allocated or assume that it goes to El Paso's BA because they're the trading point with Tucson. But third-party traders or anyone else could also access some of that value. So we talked about the fact that that's quite large in the EDAM case for El Paso, but also uncertain how much of that may be captured by the utility itself and therefore returned to customers versus captured by third-party players in the market. So that's a little bit of a recap of what we saw last time. And the kind of bottom line conclusion there is there was about a $19 million benefit in joining EDAM along with PNM and about a $9 million benefit joining Markets Plus with PNM as well. But like I said, the big driver there of the difference is this bilateral trading revenue. So we discussed kind of how to interpret that last time. The new results now in this last column in the sensitivity, we see, not surprisingly, the adjusted production cost value kind of in between the two cases, right? So there's still a benefit, right? Joining Markets Plus, even if PNM goes to EDAM, still creates an efficiency gain for El Paso relative to the current trends case. But the drop is kind of in between the two. So it's better than the EDAM case, but not quite as good as if PNM joined Markets Plus too. But then congestion revenues takes quite a hit. And the reason for that is that there was a lot of congestion, if you recall, in our model last time between El Paso and PNM. And so when El Paso joined the same market as PNM, there was a fair amount of congestion there that went to both entities. Now that congestion isn't there. This is more collected on congestion between Tucson and Palo Verde and El Paso, because that's now the market path where we see congestion. And then you still have about $7 million or almost $7 million of bilateral trading revenue with PNM, which is fairly consistent with the current trends case. So as I explained before, that connection with PNM exists now as a bilateral connection. And so we do see a lot of trading. Almost all of this $7 million of value is bilateral trading with PNM in our sensitivity case. And so where does that leave us? Again, there's still a benefit when you add it all up. There's a benefit to El Paso from joining, but it is a bit smaller than either of the two cases where they join with PNM alone, together with PNM, I should say. But then we add in the bottom rows here kind of our eddy tie value. So this is the eddy tie calculation. And let me just step through that real quickly before I take questions. So you can see in the current trends case, we calculate the value to be about $9.5 million. So again, this is based just on the historic 2023 flows and the prices that are, exist in that current trends case. And then in the EDAM case, we see the value goes up a tiny bit, but more or less it's the same as in the current trends case, which we think is pretty intuitive, right? The tie would still be at the historic flows. Again, assuming there's no co-optimization between EDAM and and SPP East, it's still basically the same value as the current, what's happening historically on the tie. And then in the Markets Plus case and the sensitivity case, we do that optimization we talked about, and you see that the value goes up to about 20 million in both cases. So you get about an 11 or $12 million gain over the current trends by being able to optimize the DC tie with SPP East. And so when you put that all together, you kind of come out to a result where all three cases kind of produce the same value. It's still a little bit less in the sensitivity case, so there's still some value being together in the same market as PNM, but the optimization of the tie gives it, brings them, let's say, closer together in that sense. So let me pause there, take questions or on kind of all the different benefit metrics.
Thank you. Yes. I have a question. So this is still the same as we talked before, where the current trends in EDAM are not optimizing the eddy tie, but Markets Plus and the sensitivity are. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the optimization gets you that kind of 11 or $12 million gain.
Okay, and then it says that if we limit the optimized ties flow to levels observed in 2023, so basically if it's not optimized, the value is reduced by 8 million per year. So I think it'd be interesting to see this as well, this chart as well without the optimization.
Yeah, I don't have that off the top of my at hand, but yeah, we certainly could do something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Again, I don't think I have any other questions on this for you, John. I still have questions on the eddy tie for El Paso, but commissioners, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I guess I just want to say something that this seems to imply to me that I find kind of remarkable, which is that you have to accept that SPP would not work to optimize interregional transfer unless you're in Markets Plus. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, right. We assume that only happens in Markets Plus here.
Okay, thank you.
I think for El Paso, I think the kind of having this chart in two additional ways. One of them is with this sensitivity in Markets Plus not optimizing the eddy tie. The other one is with the current trends in EDAM optimizing the eddy tie. I think that would be, it seems like all of those have equal possibility of occurring.
Sorry, was that a question for me or?
No, I'm just maybe asking El Paso if they could provide those two additional versions of this summary chart.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I will say, the question about assuming, EDAM, if will SPP optimize flows with EDAM? Again, there's no discussions that I'm aware of moving in that direction, but I have said in several public forums now that I think it's a good idea for Western markets to start talking to each other about seams optimization. And so I think this analysis does show there's value to doing that. If it's easier to do in Markets Plus and easier to access that value, then that's where we are. But I think there's value there, of course, in all cases, right? There's lots of value to optimizing seams between EDAM and Markets Plus too, not just the DC tie. Okay, any other questions on this?
I think we could move on. I mean, I do have one other comment, but it's kind of a question for El Paso as to whether they have the entitlements to those 200 megawatts over the eddy tie. Because I think that'll be interesting, right, to reflect here whether those entitlements actually belong to El Paso fully.
Yeah, that is a good question, and the only comment I would say to that is that if the other entitlements are also controlled by someone in SPP East or Markets Plus, then you could get all of that optimized in the market. So there is a question there about if the entitlements on the tie are split between multiple entities, where are those entities and what markets are they participating in is the next question, right? So, okay. So if there's no other questions on this slide, then I think maybe why don't we jump ahead to slide, I know I've been going for a while now. Maybe we can, hold on, my PowerPoint seems stuck here again. Hold on. Hold on a second. Let me apologize. I seem to be having trouble with my PowerPoint here. All right, let me try again. Can you see that again now?
We can.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. I don't know what was going on there. So let me jump now ahead a couple of slides to just show some of the more detailed results for a few minutes, and then we can have more Q&A. So I did want to point out some of the trading value and volumes that we see in the different cases, right? We looked at this last time, and you can see some of the patterns we talked about, right? There's a lot of obviously bilateral trading in our current trends case, which is the first section of this table. There's a lot of trading with PNM, and some of that is EIM trading, of course. There's a lot of trading with Tucson, between El Paso and Tucson. Again, some of that is EIM trading. Some of it's day ahead bilateral trading, some of it's EIM trading. Because in this case, all three of those entities are well, sorry, excuse me, that's not true. Tucson is in Markets Plus in the current trends case. So the trading with Tucson here is all bilateral. I apologize for that. And the PNM trading can be a combination bilateral EIM. In the EDAM case, you see that big number and that big volume of bilateral trading with Tucson. So that was one of the results of our EDAM case. When PNM and El Paso both joined EDAM, we saw all that bilateral trading with Tucson. You do see also here a lot of trading value and volume with PNM because they're in the same market. And that's where we get a lot of that big congestion value number that we talked about on the previous slide comes from trading with PNM in the market and congestion that exists between PNM and El Paso in the EDAM. In Markets Plus, now, of course, all three of these entities are in Markets Plus. So you see all of this kind of market trading between Tucson, PNM, and El Paso. And this is all congestion value. So we had, remember, about $12.5 million of congestion in the Markets Plus case for El Paso, and you can see that here, the 12.5 million comes from basically all of this trading between Tucson and PNM inside Markets Plus. In the sensitivity case, things are a bit split, right? You have market trading with Tucson. So not surprisingly, the volume of transactions with Tucson goes way up. You can see here it's 5.5 terawatt hours compared to, a little less than 4 or 2.5 in the previous cases. So not surprisingly, a lot more trading with Tucson in the case where El Paso's with them in Markets Plus, but not with PNM. The volume to PNM falls quite a bit compared to the two cases where they're together in the same day ahead market. But the value is still there. So that's the, like almost $7 million of bilateral trading value we saw in the benefits table comes, like I said, almost entirely from trading with PNM. So that's where we get that. And then you can kind of see over here the graphic representation of how much trading volume there is for El Paso in the different cases, right? In the current trends case, you have a lot of EIM trading, which is the teal, and some green, which is the bilateral trading. In EDAM, a lot of trading in the EDAM market, which we see is mostly with PNM. EIM trading still exists because you're still in EIM in that case, but it's a little bit smaller than the current trends. And then you have that big chunk of bilateral trading that happens with Tucson. And then Markets Plus, you see also a large increase in trading volumes over the current trends case, which is expected in a day ahead market, in either day ahead market. Most of that is day ahead. And then you have the pink here that replaces the EIM trading, which is real-time Markets Plus trading. And of course, like trading value represents this jump up in trading value that we see, or volumes, I should say, that we see between the current trends case and the day ahead markets cases are expected. And that's kind of what drives the efficiency gains that we see is there's more opportunity to buy low, sell high, turn off high cost generation, et cetera, in the market. Let me pause there. Any questions on that?
Yeah, again, just observation and tell me if I'm wrong, but in sensitivity case, EDAM case, bilateral trading doesn't go to zero.
That's right. Yeah, the bilateral trading in Markets Plus, it does because at that point, El Paso doesn't actually have any neighbors that are not in its same market, right? PNM is in its market, Tucson's in the market. Most of the Palo Verde entities are in the same market. So you kind of get bilateral trading goes pretty much to zero in the Markets Plus case.
I mean, that just goes back to how remarkable I think it is that the assumption that SPP wouldn't optimize value in any scenario. Because if they would prevent that optimization, then kind of they're shooting Markets Plus participants in the foot as long as there's bilateral trade.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with the idea that there's value to optimizing the tie in all cases. So I agree in the sense that if the EDAM and SPP East can't come to some agreement about how to optimize the tie, then they're going to be leaving value on the table, no question.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions there? Okay.
Nope.
So 2 more slides I wanted to just look at. This one shows the markets plus case, and this shows the sensitivity case. We put them here because they're kind of the most alike, let's say. It also gives you a little bit of a view of kind of the generation fleet that we've assumed for El Paso in 2032, which again is provided on information provided by El Paso. But you can see there's quite a bit of solar happening in the middle of the day. The nuclear is in orange, so the Palo Verde nuke is kind of constant and doesn't really move across the markets with cases, which is not surprising. Same thing with solar, doesn't really move across the market. But what does fluctuate a bit is imports and exports from neighboring entities. So you can see PNM is in the dark blue. So this is an hour where El Paso is exporting to PNM, and then you can see Tucson in teal. So you can see the kind of trading partners move a little bit. In the markets plus case, right, there's more trading in the overnight hours with PNM, and that's kind of declines when PNM is in a different market. So I think part of what this chart shows is that we're not talking about radical shifts in the generation fleet, right? You can see gas is a little bit different between the 2 cases, but it's not like dispatch radically changes. Partly the reason for that is a large share of the fleet is kind of not going to move by the market, like solar or nuclear. Nuclear is going to run all the time regardless of market. And so, but it is those small changes that drive these, benefits of close to $20 million in all cases. So we just wanted to point out a little bit about the dynamics of what's happening is when you join a different market than PNM, you get a little bit less trading with them, mostly driven by a change in gas generation between the 2 cases. But again, kind of quite small change in gas generation. And then the last slide I wanted to show is just to give you a sense of how the flows and value on the eddy tie change in our analysis. So the left-hand side chart over here shows you the volume, and then the right-hand side chart shows you the value by hour of day. So you can see the historical, like I said earlier, is pretty flat. It's right around 40 megawatts importing into El Paso pretty much every hour of the year. It's right around 40 megawatts. But then when we allow it to be optimized, the green line is in the markets plus case, the yellow line is in the sensitivity. When we optimize it based on prices in the El Paso area, you can see that it does jump around a bit more. And in overnight hours, it tends to be exporting, and in daytime hours tends to be importing. Okay. And then lastly, this is the value of the tie. So you can see, again, historically, the value does move. So even though the flow is constant, the prices change, and it's more valuable in overnight hours when you don't have all that solar. And that holds true also in the optimization cases. So even in the optimization cases, daytime hours, it's basically the same value whether you optimize it or not, simply because the prices are impacted by all that solar. But you are able to extract more value in the overnight hours by changing the direction of flow and optimizing the time. So the kind of takeaway here in my mind is that the DC tie flows and the value of the DC tie optimization is really an overnight hour story. By being able to be more flexible with the use of the tie in the overnight hours, you can capture price movements between at the SPP East and the West. Okay, so let me stop there. And those are kind of all the slides I had prepared. I skipped over a couple just to be a little quicker, but happy to take questions on anything. for the rest of the time we have.
So I'm gonna maybe turn to the room here to see if anybody in the room has questions. Seems like not. Patrick, do we have any questions online? You can, if you're online, you could raise your hand or, somehow let Patrick know that you have a question.
Yes, Commissioner, we have one person with their hand raised.
Okay. Yeah. Whoever that, we can't see the screen right now. We're seeing the presentation. So whoever that is, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is Vijay Satyal from WRA. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Hi, John.
Hi,
A
Vijay.
lot of good work again. Um, I I try to save the slides as you were presenting. If we can go way back to your approach slide where you talked about your approach on the yep, perfect.
Yeah.
So, couple of things here that I want to clarify, please. Number one, you have assumed that the eddy tie is available. And as to, I think, Commissioner Aguilera's question, you are presuming that the agreements are in place for full use of the eddy tie as part of the modeling of El Paso Electric being part of Markets Plus.
That's right. Yeah. With the only caveat I would add to that, Vijay, is that we do assume historical outages apply in kind of all cases.
Correct.
So even in the Markets Plus cases, when El Paso's in there, the tie is not available all the time. There's still kind of historical outages.
Perfect. So if we go to the next slide, then you also take a historical assumption using historical flows up to a max of 120 megawatts could be harnessed out of the tie. So if you're taking that as your limit, or 75, or basically that brings the reduction in the net benefit of using the eddy tie down by $8 million. That's in your paragraph there to the left.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, and what we're saying there is that the historic data, we never see flows above that 120 amount. So you kind of have to infer, does that mean that's not actually the max it could flow? So it might be able to flow more, but just in 2023, it never did. So we kind of looked at it in the sense of, if we allow for 200 megawatts of optimization, that's the numbers shown in the table here. But you could take a look at it and say, well, what if we only allowed it to flow at the max that we observed in 2023?
Right.
And if we did that, then yeah, you do get smaller value. And it is disproportional in the sense that that additional capacity is very valuable in a few hours of the year, and therefore it does knock the benefit down a bit.
Okay, that helps. That confirms my thinking. And my last question, if we go to your really good slide about the trading volume where you compared, yep, perfect, thank you. So am I also understanding here correctly, big picture, El Paso Electric stands to benefit by joining Markets Plus under the assumptions we accept, if we accept of the eddy tie, but expecting P&M to stay in EDAM so that there'll be higher trading benefits across the same and also the existing relationship with Tucson Electric Power. Plus, you are adjusting for the lack of access to a lot of clean renewables and energy that could be sold in the Four Corners, which was the case through EDAM case.
Yeah, that was a bit of a multi-part question, but let me try to answer it all, Vijay.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, so it is certainly true that in our EDAM case, where both PNM and El Paso joined EDAM, we did see that dynamic that you described, right? There was a lot of clean energy coming in from California through Four Corners, or mostly from California, I should say, but coming from the western part of the WECC into Four Corners down into New Mexico. That was definitely the dynamic we saw. So there was a lot of prices went down in New Mexico because of that. And that's what drives a lot of this big trading value that you see here. And that's really what drove the benefit in EDAM. In Markets Plus, you see less of that, of course, because access to Four Corners is, you know, when PNM is in EDAM and El Paso's not, it's in Markets Plus. El Paso doesn't have access to Four Corners except through the Arizona entities, right? In that kind of roundabout way that I described earlier. So we do see the dynamics and the flows change a bit in our model. You don't see that same pattern. Instead, what you see is more power flowing into Arizona through Tucson and then up to Four Corners from there. So I don't know if that answers your question, VJ, exactly, but
It kind of does. So thank you. I'll just end Commissioner Regular by saying that I do hope if you will be finalizing this report, if you could also please identify the assumptions that have been made in terms of El Paso Elect participation in Markets Plus with the presumption or hope or intention of leveraging the RTO West footprint, because it's still two different markets. Markets Plus has been designed for the day ahead in the West with different price structure rules. RTO West is going to be a different, so as to speak, well-intended, a different animal of a market. So if you're presuming that El Paso Electric will be able to leverage the two markets, it'll be great that you highlight that in your report. That's my 2 cents, but thank you.
okay, yeah, and I'll answer that now. We do assume, and basically all of the market benefit studies we've done since the beginning of this effort several years ago for various utilities, we've always assumed that SPP West and the Markets Plus will be co-optimized, and that assumption is based on. I think I said at the beginning, the original proposal document that was put out for Markets Plus many years ago explicitly says that the idea or the plan is to optimize those two markets. They are very different, of course, right? One is an RTO, Markets Plus is not that. So there is differences there, but our assumption has always been that those markets will be co-optimized. If you stopped that, if you broke that assumption, you would see changes here. I don't know how much it would impact El Paso exactly, but we do have always kind of assumed that those two markets will be together.
Thank you.
Patrick, do we have any other questions online?
There are no more questions online.
Okay. Okay, John, thank you so much for the presentation. It seems like we don't have any additional questions. I certainly appreciate you know, your continued work to study these markets. I know we had a lot of questions kind of about the eddy tie, but I also recognize that you're working with the parameters provided by the client here. And so you know, thank you again for your work on this.
Yeah, of course, we appreciate that. And as always, if there's more questions or anything like that, we are happy to discuss more in the future.
Thank you. Let me do a time check. Okay, so I think it's probably a good time for a break. And I'm going to see if we want a longer break for lunch or if we should power through. Commissioners, do you have?
It's my high holy day for my religion, so I would prefer the shorter break.
Okay, so how about we come back at 11:55. I'm sorry, is my 11:55, and then we can continue on with El Paso. Okay.
It's here.
All right, thank you all for coming back. I think we're ready to continue with our agenda here. And I'm just double checking. Yep, so we have a presentation by El Paso Electric, and then followed by questions. Also, we'll give stakeholders an opportunity to ask questions, and then some closing remarks. And I think we could go ahead and get started. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves. Yeah, use that mic.
All right. Thank you, commissioners, for having this. My name is Dave Hawkins. I'm Vice President of Operations Support for El Paso Electric. Some of my responsibilities include resource strategy, which falls under the market development side, as well as system planning and system interconnection studies as well. And I'll let Emmanuel introduce himself.
So Emmanuel Villalobos, I'm the Director for Market Development and Resource Strategy with El Paso. I want to start off by saying we really appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you all, Chairman and Commissioners. We understand that after our announcement was made and after speaking with you, we understand that we misrepresented ourselves and that we were going to bring these results to you all prior to that. We are here today to rectify that and hopefully begin open and transparent dialogue again. So we are deeply sorry for that miscommunication on our half. We can dive right in. We stripped a lot of the presentation out that we knew we had coordinated with John that he was going to go over the figures and all that for you. So what we want to stress more is what was EPE's thinking or mindset. A lot on the slide here, and I'm not going to bore you by reading it. But essentially, we want to have it come across that we feel that Markets Plus offers the more operational flexibility and reliability that ultimately align with our long-term strategic goals. And I think to level set, it's important to say that EP's first responsibility to its customers is to ensure safe and reliable service. You can go on to the next slide, please. So this one here is more to just try to level set the conversation on the studies that have been conducted to date. So all studies that have been conducted or that EP has also been a part of, there are certain truths that just ring true across the board. Joining a day-ahead market is always better than remaining in the status quo. And you always get additional benefits, incremental benefits from joining a day-ahead market, because the day-ahead market is just being placed on top of the already optimized EIM energy market. So you should see modest or incremental benefits because you're making a already optimized market just a little better. So what we want to point out is that all studies, including Brattle's, don't capture the full picture. They do focus on production cost and congestion and all that, but you're still missing governance, reliability, interconnection, a whole other aspects that need to go into your market decision. So we do think that the decision for market participation needs to be viewed holistically and not just focus on the production values that come out of these studies. We can go to the next slide. So just a quick mention or recap. There's been 4 industry-wide studies to date. The first of which was the EDAM feasibility study. Again, this is where you can really see the beginning thoughts that a day-ahead market would show an incremental increase to benefits because you're placing it over the existing EIM optimized market. The second study was the state-led market study. One of the results from that I find notable or worth mentioning is that the results for New Mexico within that study showed more benefits with a two-market state solution. We can go to the next slide.
Can you clarify that? Do you mean two markets in New Mexico or two or day ahead?
Two day-ahead markets.
Okay.
The next slide. So the third study was the WMEX study, and we've spoken to you all about that before. We still think that the WMEX study remains the largest and most collaborative study to date, because that one included 25 entities providing non-public information to build the model. They did not have to rely on publicly available information. The fourth study is the Brattle study that we've seen a few entities take part in, but just like the other studies, I want to point out that the Brattle study is just one piece of the puzzle. All of these studies are just tools in the toolbox, just one more thing to consider as you're putting together this whole holistic idea of what you need to accomplish. We can go on to the next slide. So in addition to EP participating in the WMEX study, participating in the Brattle study, following up also enlisted Utilicast to help us perform some additional analysis. The first of which is the business case assessment, and now they are following up with a gap analysis on behalf of EP. And I'm going to dive into those two in a little more detail. So next slide. So this one here, key EP takeaways. This is in reference to the information that John presented earlier. So there are a few takeaways that we need to highlight from those tables and from the results of the sensitivity. The first of which is that Markets Plus, just like EDAM, still provides EP with substantial benefits, even in a two-market solution, meaning when PNM goes to one market and EP goes to the other. The difference, if you see between the totals on John's table, that we will bring you these additional variations of those tables, you see that the difference between all three footprints is about 1.3 million, which is not a sizable amount. Again, going back to these constants that we've seen ring true throughout all of the studies and things that we've worked on, is that Markets Plus and EDAM offer nearly identical benefits to EPE's New Mexico customers, or to EPE's customers as a whole. Something else to point out is that trading revenues remain stable under any market that EP joins. Markets Plus will allow for more intertie trading by default, which would be more efficient than traditional bilateral trading. But again, going back, even taking into account all of the financial benefits of Markets Plus or EDAM, they remain very close. So ultimately, outside of just the modeling. To the chairman's earlier comments about reconciling models that have some inherent error in them with reality, that's the approach that we were taking. Because we had spoken in the past about how we disagreed with some of the assumptions in Brattle study, and John had mentioned it earlier, where the assumption that EPE would benefit 100% of all the trading revenue possible in the area. We know that we are not the only trading entity in the Southwest. So again, we've been trying to reconcile the solutions that are being provided from the modeling with what happens in real life and how the system is actually set up. So we can go on to the next slide. So the Utilicast business case facilitation, what Utilicast did for EP there was they interviewed all of the subject matter experts from EPE that have been participating in the Markets Plus and EDAM and other market development initiatives. EPE has had maybe 24 employees involved in different working groups or attending different conferences, committees, etc. So what Utilicast did was interview all of those subject matter experts, take what they had been learning over the last 2 years, positives and negatives of both markets, and ultimately reaffirmed the decision that Markets Plus seems to be the better option for EPE's system. The next slide shows Utilicast is currently working on a gap assessment where they're going to take the business case facilitation, but just dive into a lot more detail, trying to identify the gaps that are needed for EPE to transition from having the EIM market into Markets Plus. They're going to be looking at possible changes in our tariffs, outage management, reliability concerns, metering, just everything so that we can make sure that we take into account all possible variables. On the next slide, this is a updated timeline of EPE's involvement in the current market efforts. I wanted to point out particularly the bottom portion that shows the EP Brattle study, the Utilicast business case facilitation and gap assessment. We're hoping that the gap assessment is completed early Q2 possibly. So we're still working on that one. We have estimated that Markets Plus would probably take us about a 2-year implementation timeline or 2-year runway. We think we can get that started early in 2026, and the estimate would take us to early 2028. We can go to the next slide. Next slide after that. So this one here again is just to level set all of the benefits that you would expect from joining a day-ahead market. Again, you would expect to see this in both Markets Plus and EDAM, reduced cost of production, better investment savings for more optimal region-wide planning. But the core of the situation is the next slide. So here we can dive into a little more detail, but again, when you're looking at customer benefits, when you're talking about your adjusted production costs and different congestion revenues and everything that we've seen thus far, Markets Plus and EDAM would offer EPE's customers similar solutions, similar value. So that appears, you could consider that a wash. We need to move on to other variables. When you're looking at governance participation, we believe that Markets Plus has the more transparent governance structure. We are following the California Senate bill, and we do appreciate the efforts that the Pathways Initiative is taking. Even then, if the Pathways Initiative can make the EDAM governance structure equal to that of Markets Plus, that again would just make them a wash in EPE's eyes. So we need to rely on the operational considerations that EPE needs to take into account. So as we mentioned in the past, EPE is the easternmost footprint of the WECC. Everything that we import in terms of energy, everything flows west to east. We are the tail end of the WECC. But in terms of interconnections, we have 2 main arteries that interconnect us with Arizona versus 1 that interconnects us with the rest of New Mexico. We have a DC tie that connects us directly to the SPP East. the eddy tie has been important to us for reliability in the past. Because again, everything flows west to east into our system, and the eddy tie allows us to flow power east to west, and that has different benefits for line offloading and helping with more imports and balancing the system. So again, our priority has to be to ensure reliability and safe deliverable service to our customers. A few years ago, EPE had gone into their reliability coordinator services. They chose the interconnections group, or I'm sorry, the system operations group, went with SPP as their RC, and they have had good success within that system and like the way that SPP operates their reliability coordinator services. More on the operational considerations, there are the resource adequacy concerns, whereas Markets Plus does have the RAP requirement for resource adequacy. EPE does think that that is an important step forward, as does, folks like PNM who have joined RAP, where it is important to make sure that everybody is on equal footing on how you're calculating your resources. And then ultimately, we need to take into account your vendor system. So again, EPE already uses SPP for reliability coordinator services. Everything that was used, or most of what was used as the investment into the EIM, is not a sunk cost or a lost cost. Everything that you would have had to do to join the EIM is what you would have to do for Markets Plus. You would have to do staffing, training, system upgrades. All of that will translate into either adding EDAM or transitioning completely into Markets Plus. Our software vendors and those contracts that we have are set up in such a way that they are offering modules for Markets Plus. So we would be able to transition out of one into the other. But again, to summarize, we needed to look at factors greater than just the customer benefits that are almost a wash that come out of the model. We needed to focus on reliability and interconnection. And if you all have any questions, welcome to answer any.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the presentation. Commissioners, do you guys have any questions?
Well, I did want to hear the answers to the questions that you'd asked earlier. And then additional question is, what is EPE's financial commitment to Markets Plus? I mean, my understanding was if you committed to join phase 2, you needed to pony up some money to help SPP develop that. And so how much has EPE put?
$0. So EPE has not signed the phase 2 funding agreement. We are thinking that that won't happen until Q1 of 2026. However, those discussions have started with SPP. I mean, initial introductions, nothing formally yet. However, the commitment towards SPP for Markets Plus would be that in the form of collateral and not actual dollars being put up front. And then once that loan or the market takes off, that loan would be paid back through the market rate and eventually drop off. So at the moment, there is no financial contribution from EPE.
So how much is the collateral?
I do not recall off the top of my head. We can get you those numbers. They're based off of your size within the footprint of SPP. So it's a ratioed share.
Yes, so I just want to clarify there. I mean, it does cost money to join the market, and customers will have to pay something. So I think maybe even if it's through an admin charge over time. So I think that's maybe kind of the version of the question that I have is, what is the financial commitment estimated to be?
I don't have the answer, but let me lead in with this. I think I had heard before a number that Tucson Electric had put out, and if it's based on the size of the footprint in a particular market, Tucson has a larger capacity peak than we do. It would be something less than Tucson's if we're doing a ratio of those loads, but I don't have the specifics. I would put that as a ceiling. Not sure where the floor ends up.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, right? Because you would think that that would be part of the assessment as well. Recognizing that joining either market was going to cost some money. So as you kind of were discussing about a wash, I think, you know, that's probably a wash, although you are in the EIM already. So I would think that it would be an easier transition if you already have certain software, certain knowledge, you know, like expertise and training in place to operate in EIM.
So so let me try to address all of that. Yes, there would still be a incremental cost even going from EIM to EDAM. We have been doing some work to reconcile the costs on the EDAM side from what we've seen so far. And again, I don't want to throw numbers out there. The incremental cost of going from the EIM to the EDAM seems to be higher than the cost that it would take us to move completely over to Markets Plus. And again, my earlier point, yes, it would be easier to just add on the EDAM. But again, the staffing and training and software and knowing how the EIM or that optimized market works, a lot of that subject matter expertise will translate over. But ultimately, we can't make a decision based on, well, it's easier for us. We need to do what's best for the system and ensure reliable service.
Right. So we'll get to that. I think maybe before we get to those things, because I do want to touch on these points that you have on this slide, but maybe if we can just talk about the Eddy tie and the thoughts behind there. Interested in more history, like the ownership and the entitlements that El Paso specifically has over the tie.
Sure. El Paso and PNM are co-owners of the Eddy tie. El Paso has rights for 2/3 of the capacity amount, the 200 megawatts, including the transmission on the other side of the tie. That transmission is higher than 200, but it's still a 1/3, 2/3 sharing between PNM and El Paso.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought the answer was, which is why I was asking. And I guess I should, maybe we should expand on that a little bit more, because if PNM has the other third of the rights on that line, how does that factor then into your decision to use that, your 2/3 for Markets Plus, and instead of really optimizing it with PNM and their third?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, historically, the flows from east to west have been east to west on that tie. El Paso has used that tie for reliability reasons. It provides support to the eastern part of our system where our load growth is. And so when you see things like 40 megawatts, that's the minimum on the tie, 35, 40 megawatts. So the tie is not something that's flexible in its current state to go up and down. And so we will bring 40 megawatts in during projected high load periods in the summer, or periods where transmission lines from the west are being worked on or forced out. And that's how we've used it for reliability reasons. I'm not aware that how PNM has used that for load. I think typically, PNM can correct me, I see that as posted as available transmission to be used when it's available, but I can't tell you, in the future how they would see their use of that in the EDAM market.
Okay, but you see kind of where I'm going at, right? What I'm getting at is that, PNM owns part of this, and yet your sensitivity analysis relies so heavily on using 200 megawatts of that, where really right now you're only using 40, and then you don't even have the rights to the full 200.
Yeah, let me say that I think, as was pointed out, the model is making assumptions.
Yeah.
And when you look at the operation of the system, those don't always line up with the model. So not only is there co-ownership with the eddy tie, there's co-ownership with transmission lines between Arizona and New Mexico, one of which PNM has ownership in, Tri-State has ownership in. So, I think the question goes to probably not just what are the assumptions made for the eddy tie, what are the assumptions on all those lines in the different markets. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't have the answer to that. My thought when I look at bilateral trades and whether you're trading to the east of our system or to the west of our system, my first look at is probably the production cost and where's the value there, because my understanding is we'll still have the ability to trade in the bilateral market. Palo Verde is a very liquid hub. Right now we have bilateral trades there that take place at Palo Verde that provide significant revenues. Mm. And I don't expect that to change in regards to EPE having a bilateral market to trade in. And so when I look at, if you're an EDAM or if you look at SPP, I view that as after the bilateral market takes place, what is left for the market to dispatch. And my assumption is all resources in these models are left for the day ahead markets.
Okay. I think it would be helpful to kind of have a more, I think if you're going to use the eddy tie in your sensitivity analysis, having a more realistic study of it, where if PNM and El Paso are in different markets, El Paso can use its 2/3, so I guess 200 minus 66, yeah, 67. And then also recognizing that it could be used in a scenario where both PNM and El Paso are in EDAM. And then I think it's more realistic in that sense to optimize it to 200. So, that's what would make more sense to me. I think it's probably more realistic, but I think you also make a really good point about that all models are wrong, right? They're based on the assumptions. I think, the eddy tie here and the way it's used is a good example of that. And the guidance document talked about economics and considering the economics. And I'm just wondering how you consider customer benefits and really what I'm talking about here is the cost to the end consumer. I think for me that is more important, and how you weigh that against something like the governance participation. So we'll put a pin on that because I have a couple more comments to make. I think you mentioned reliability being important. And I want to draw that out a little bit more, because when I think about reliability, I think that El Paso will maintain a reliable system in either market, or in only the EIM, or even if you're not in any regional market. And so I do think there are some efficiencies, I think maybe that could be gained with reliability, but in terms of keeping the lights on, I think that happens either way. And I guess I'm looking at this fourth bullet here, the interconnection, well, neither day-ahead market changes the interconnection. So just kind of wondering about that. And then also about the reliability coordinator services, wondering what the significance is of that, because so the West used to have one RC, right? It was peak reliability. I think around 2019 it shut down, and then SPP and CAISO stepped up and started to provide those RC services. And they're essential services, like coordinating outages and things like that. But how does that factor into a market decision? There are entities right now that have like SPP as the RC, and they participate in the EIM. El Paso is one of them. So I don't know. I'm wondering how you're thinking about these things, because I mean, also like with the resource adequacy, it seems to me that EDAM would provide more flexibility, because with Markets Plus, you have to join the RAP. I think El Paso probably has a long way to go to meet the RAP's requirements. And so I think necessarily what that means is you need to accelerate how much generation, how many resources you're procuring, which I think we've talked about before, that these are resources that you plan to procure already, but this would accelerate the schedule. EDAM doesn't require the RAP, but you would still have the option to join it or not. And so EDAM has the resource sufficiency evaluation. So that's another one that I'm thinking about. How exactly are you evaluating that? And then the last one is on the governance. Are you aware with the concerns that I've raised about the Markets Plus governance? Okay. Well, SPP knows about it. Markets Plus, they know about it, and so I'm working with the MSC to see if we can change the governance structure. And so I think noting that as a benefit of Markets Plus, I think just conflicts with what I know about the governance structure. And so you can see that I kind of have a lot of questions about each of these. And so I don't know if, I asked too many questions for you to be able to respond to any one. I recognize that, but I think I'm seeing things differently, and I'm wondering maybe if you could elaborate, for like reliability and interconnection. We don't want to stay here too long, but if you can just kind of talk about those a little bit more.
Yeah. So reliability and interconnection, I think from my standpoint, has to do with our connection with PNM is regulated by a phase shifting transformer, right? It pegs how much can actually flow. So when you look at the full capability of the transmission line, it's really fixed more by the phase shifter limitations at this point. And so really the greater flow in our system comes from our interface with Tucson Electric at Springerville, at Greenlee. And so if we are in a similar market to those entities, I think the loss of a generator, the loss of a transmission line, I see some efficiencies and flexibility within that market of addressing those issues when we share a similar market. I think that's the reliability. You touched on one other thing. I don't want to miss all your questions, but one thing I remember you talking about is the economics and looking at the various economics. As you're probably well aware, both PNM and El Paso both talk about the opportunities of large load customers. And I think if you talk in the scale of a gigawatt on either of our systems, that probably turns this model on its head and you have to rerun it. And so my point in this is we can fine tune the model. We can look at various things in the model, but in a year from now, what does it look like? I think, Commissioner, you may have this experience. You model something and a year later you have new assumptions, new loads, new generation, and it changes the outputs of your model. And when we're talking about large load possibilities, we're not talking about incremental changes that maybe each utility is used to 20, 30 megawatts growth year over year. It's significant. So, like I said, my thoughts on the bilateral trading, on the benefits of those in either market, to me, it's really more of the production cost. You put in, if either utility puts in a 90% load factor load, there's probably not a lot of excess wind or solar in those off-peak areas anymore, because now you have load that can absorb those things in each utility's service territory. I know I cut over to that just because it's stuck in my head a little bit, but I want to be able to get to each of your points. I know we hit reliability, interconnection, reliability coordinator services. We've been working with, we went through PRC. We went through having to make that decision. We've had a good experience with SPP as our reliability coordinator. Historically, from working with PRC to working with SPP, in our experience, it seems more utility friendly, at least from what we've dealt with and the people we talk to. So we've been very satisfied with those services. And not to say that California couldn't provide similar services. I can only tell you what our experience has been prior to SPP as reliability coordinator.
Okay, so that helps. So you have experience with SPP as a RC and you like that relationship. That makes more sense to me than kind of how I saw it just hanging out here on the paper, because when I saw this, it seemed to me like, well, wouldn't it be easier to switch reliability coordinators than to switch to a whole new market? But that helps.
I'm going to step out a little bit on the resource adequacy, but I'm going to turn it when it gets too complicated and my brain gets foggy, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Villalobos. But from what I understand, and I know you mentioned RAP, and you're right, our previous IRP that was, I think, commission accepted in 2022, we had talked about going to a reliability standard similar to what RAP, a requirement of RAP is in 2030 was our goal. And the requirements when we joined would actually be accelerated. I think the benefit, and when we talk about reliability from that standpoint, understand that in ENDAM, it's voluntary. You can sign up for RAP if you like. I think the benefit of all of the region who is participating in a Markets Plus signing up under the same rules as what is the value of capacity contribution from certain type of resources. I think that provides the reliability of the market within. And I go there saying right now, I can say I'm going to get 50% solar to meet my peak in the summer. Arizona may say, we view solar as 80% contribution. Or, it's sort of out there for the utilities to come up with their number depending on whatever criteria they're using to evaluate. So I think for the benefit of reliability of that market footprint to look at things in a similar fashion makes sense to me as resource adequacy, providing a reliability benefit from the RAP perspective.
Okay, yeah, I'm thinking about that because again, it's still an option under EDAM, so you still have that ability to speak to other utilities on the same terms. And EDAM just has a different way of ensuring reliability. I mean, I think they probably both, I mean, I think they both work. I don't know, do you have concerns with this resource efficiency evaluation or?
So historically, we had viewed through a backward looking lens, what does solar do to our system? And we didn't have a lot of solar at the time. I mean, so if we're off, we weren't off by a whole lot. And so we would look at historical peak days and say what percentage of solar were we getting? And we would say, okay, let's count solar at 70% going forward. Well, I think the more solar as we've added onto our system and project to add onto our system, similar to the duck curve, it's no longer that 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon that you need to be looking at, because solar will take care of everything. You can pile up all the solar you want and know that you have enough resources at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. But how are you doing at 6 or 7 or 8 in the evening as the sun's going down? So we made that change as we knew we were going to add more renewable resources going forward in our system. And I think that it's to the point where getting to the point that, yes, it's voluntary to join EDAM. It's voluntary to look at things, but I think, I'm sorry, RAP, a lot of acronyms here for me, that if there's this standard by which people measure things, I think it puts you in these guidelines that you have to stay in between. And I think from when we say voluntary, I can't make the other people around me who are in the EDAM have that same view of how they should be measuring things. And so when we look at what is resource adequacy in Arizona, or we look at what is resource adequacy in Colorado, what metric are they using to measure and how much power is really going to be out there in the summer? And so, yes, voluntarily we can join. I think PNM is joining RAP voluntarily. I don't know if I answered your question. I did a lot of talking.
Well, I think so I think the RAP is going to be harder for, especially for El Paso to meet. Just looking at previous documents with resources in terms of like a reserve margin. I remember seeing numbers of like 7%, 9%, maybe not 7, but like 9, something like that. And we're talking about a pretty large jump. And also with the requirement to have the capacity procured 7 months in advance with the RAP. And so I don't disagree with any of that. I do think, I mean, resource adequacy obviously is important. I think the fact that Markets Plus requires RAP would put El Paso in a situation where you need to procure those resources a lot sooner, which has implications on customers, cost implications on customers. So I would see that as a benefit, as a regulator who's concerned about affordability. I would see that as a benefit to have in EDAM to have more of that flexibility. Especially given that, RAP hasn't taken off and it's been delayed and, it's been having its own issues. So, yeah, but it's helpful to talk about this? to
The
see how
the only
this-
thing I would add, and I'm sure the commission is well aware, we're starting our integrated resource plan. And, hopefully we produce opportunities to provide additional capacity through other mechanisms than new build generation. I think hopefully that path and that study that's underway would take into consideration, the 1 in 10 loss of load expectation by 2030, or could that happen sooner through other alternatives?
Okay, I do want to move to one other thing that I haven't mentioned yet, which is about so the initial Brattle study that we saw last year indicated reduced greenhouse gas emissions from participation in EDAM and increased emissions in Markets Plus. And so, one of the things you have in your presentation is that Markets Plus aligns with your renewable integration goals. And so just kind of if you could speak to that, how those two align with each other.
Can't answer that at the moment because I don't have the table in front of me. I do know which one you are referring to. I can come back to you with that answer. Immediately off the top of my head, I think it had something to do with the way the model was making PNM purchase more gas from EPE overnight. That was causing the increase in GHG. But again, I want to be absolutely sure to bring you that correct response.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. And I remember the outcome. I don't remember the details either, but I wanted to see if how Markets Plus and PNM and EDAM, if that has an effect on emissions and how that would help El Paso meet its renewable energy obligations. Do you have, commissioners, do you have any other questions?
Oh, this has answered my questions.
Okay, I guess at this point, maybe ask if you have anything additional that you would like to share with respect to my responses or my questions, and if not, I would then go to the room to see if anybody has questions and then online. Okay, does anybody else in the room have questions? Okay, Patrick, do we have anybody online with questions? If you have a question, you can raise your hand or somehow let Patrick know.
Oh, yes, Commissioner, we do have one.
Okay, can you manage those, please?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, BJ.
Thank you. Hello, Vijay Satyal, Deputy Director, Markets and Transmission for WRA. Thank you for your update. Mr. Dave Hawkins, if I'm correct, hopefully I got your name right. I wanted to share a FYI for the commission and staff to be aware, and then I'll just ask my question as a result of that comment to El Paso Electric. I don't know if the commission is aware that SPP Markets Plus is deliberating as we speak, unfortunately more restrictive meeting attendance policy that is going to make it harder for public interest organizations who truly want a market in the West, who are supportive of Markets Plus being implemented. And it would create a situation where if we miss 2 or 3 meetings, I think it's now going to 4 or 5, but if we missed X number of consecutive meetings, we get removed from a work group or task force. Last I know, in the memory of my working of 15 years with state commissions, if I miss 3 of the commission hearings, that doesn't mean WRA cannot attend a future commission hearing. So to Mr. Dave Hawkins, my question is, I don't know if you're aware of how transparent truly has the Markets Plus process been in terms of this potential meeting policy if it gets adopted on April 22nd? And second, I wish to really correct for the record that the WMEG study was not transparently done. It was done with the help of utilities making definitely good, I'm sure, good data and assumptions, but it was never once presented for feedback or draft, unlike the state-led market study. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that too, please. Thank you.
Regarding the meeting attendance and the rules around that, I'm not aware of those details.
Sure, I understand. And in terms of the WMEG study, it made quite a few assumptions around how the interchange and intertide transfer capacity would work. I was wondering what you are, I think you've 3 times emphasized production cost benefits matter a lot. So I appreciate hearing that because that's what WRA believes in, is seeing the facts on the table. Is there any thought or possibility that if you decide to make this big move to join Markets Plus, that you will be initiating a SEAMS agreement and an interoperability agreement proposal with PNM, and could that be brought to the commission? So that would be equally available for the commission to review as part of supporting or approving the Markets Plus entry. It is my understanding that the MISO SPP SEAMS agreement has taken over time, 6, 8, 10 years to completely be fleshed out. And there is a SEAMS work group in the SPP Markets Plus, but I think there's a SEAM going to be created within New Mexico. And I was wondering if you had any specific plans, even in that area, to be addressed in a proactive way. Thank you.
We would gladly do whatever the commission would like us to do, but we have not entered into any conversations with PNM regarding a SEAMS issue. I can't tell you that I'm for it or against it at this point. I just haven't put any thought into it.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Aguilar. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. I think so I appreciate the explanation. I think that I have we have a better understanding of kind of this decision and or announcement. There are a few other things that I want to mention because I have been involved in some of the aspects of the development of Markets Plus. I am a member of the Markets Plus States Committee, and so I talked to them. I would encourage you to listen in to those meetings because I have expressed various concerns and would encourage you to be more involved in the development, the working groups. I think that would make me feel more comfortable. One of the concerns that I had raised before is the alignment with the dates of the wrap and the ability in Markets Plus to remove your transmission with only 30 days notice. I think there's a mismatch there. There are utilities and entities intending to join Markets Plus that have a lot of transmission. One thing that I didn't see noted on here is the importance of a market monitor. That's another consideration that I would hope you take to heart, because it's important. I would encourage you to talk to the editor and see what concerns they might have as a way to educate your staff when you're participating in the market.
I thank you for those comments, and obviously your involvement is way ahead of mine at this point, but I share your request, and that I view it as very important for us to be involved.
Yeah, and so, you know, I think we could be more collaborative going forward, and talk about kind of the market development and we're on the same team, right? We're both looking out for the same customers, and so that's why I think that's important. Thank you. Okay, anything else, commissioners?
No, I don't know where we're at on the agenda, but I mean, I thought today was important for me, mostly to reset the relationship that we have when we are in collaborative working workshops. So hopefully we never have to do this again. So, I mean, the message that I gave you one-on-one is that, hey, when you say you're going to do something, you've created the expectation. And then when you don't do it, it breaks the trust. So, and then just in general, you know, my big question whenever I'm looking at these regional market questions is, well, you know, what I signed on to when I signed the letter that led to Pathways, which is, as a regulator, you know, I expect you're going to be reliable. I expect you're going to operate your system. I'm concerned about best cost for customers. And so, that's where I'm coming from on all this, and didn't hear that mentioned on the list of things that EPE thinks is important. And so that's just a honest sharing of where I'm sitting after today. Thank you for coming. Hopefully we can get back in a mode where we can have these kind of workshops and believe each other when we're talking to each other.
Well, thank you again. Really appreciate the explanation here. I do feel like I have a better understanding of the decision and you know, stakeholders as well. So I think there were a couple of asks for the kind of the graphs. I think that's we can talk about whether that requires a workshop. I probably off the top of my head, I would say no. Maybe it's just something that's posted on, you know, into the docket might be easier, but also happy to reconvene and continue to have conversations. So thank you all. Thank you for those who came in person, and we are adjourned.